This is the story of a woman named Elena, who lived alone in a small house in the mountains of northern Spain. One ordinary winter evening, the rotary phone in her kitchen began. She had ever held about life and death upside down. The phone had been disconnected from the wall for nearly a decade. Some calls bring information, some calls bring fear. This one brought both, and the warning it carried might have saved her life. To understand what happened that night, the story has to begin with the woman on the other end of the line. Elena's grandmother had raised her. The two of them had lived together in the same small mountain house for most of Elena's childhood. The grandmother, Carmen, was a stern woman with a soft heart, a strong faith, and a habit of singing while she cooked. She had owned an old rotary phone that sat on a wooden shelf in the kitchen, mounted on a metal bracket her late husband had installed in the 1970s. Carmen used that phone every single day to talk with her sister, her priest, and her doctor. When Carmen passed away from a sudden stroke, Elena returned to the house only twice in the years that followed. The first time was to gather her grandmother's belongings. The second was to move in for good after her own marriage ended. By the time Elena settled into the house full-time, the rotary phone had been disconnected for years. Its cord had been cut by the phone company during a wiring upgrade. The bracket on the wall held it in place purely out of habit. For all practical purposes, that phone had not been able to ring since the day Carmen died. So what really happened the night Elena heard it? It was a Tuesday in February. The temperature outside had dropped below freezing. Elena was reheating soup on the stove when the rotary phone began to ring. The sound was so unfamiliar that she froze in place. She thought at first that it was a sound from outside. Then she thought it was a memory triggered by the cold. It was the exact mechanical clatter that the old phone had always made, slow, deep, and rattling against the metal bracket. She walked toward it on shaking legs. She lifted the receiver. She held it to her ear, and she heard Carmen's voice. Her grandmother spoke clearly. She used Elena's childhood nickname. She told her to leave the kitchen immediately. She said the words twice. Then the line clicked dead. Elena dropped the receiver and stepped back. Her heart was pounding. Her hands were shaking, and she walked on instinct into the living room without looking back. 2 minutes later, the kitchen ceiling collapsed. But how could a disconnected phone ring at all? And what caused the ceiling to fall in? The contractor inspected the damage and explained what he saw. A pipe in the attic had frozen overnight. The ice had cracked the joint. Water had poured into the kitchen ceiling for hours before the wood gave out. The plaster, the beams, and a heavy iron pot rack had all crashed down onto the very spot where Elena had been standing only minutes before. If she had stayed at the stove, the technician said, the impact alone would have killed her. The phone technician arrived later that day and inspected the rotary phone. He confirmed what Elena already knew. The cord had been cut at the wall for almost a decade. There was no internal battery. There was no power source. There was no way the bell mechanism could have rung on its own. He took the phone apart, examined every piece, and put it back together with a puzzled look on his face. He told Elena he had no explanation. He also told her not to throw the phone away. An object that should have been silent had spoken loudly enough to keep a woman alive. But why would Carmen reach out from beyond the grave just to save her granddaughter from a ceiling? And is this the kind of thing that happens more often than people admit? Paranormal researchers have collected thousands of cases like this one. They call them crisis calls or warning contacts. The pattern is always similar. A deceased loved one reaches out through a familiar object, a phone, a radio, a doorbell, a music box. The message is short. The message is urgent. Skeptics offer simple answers. They point to coincidence. They point to vivid dreams that feel real. But Elena was awake. She was holding a wooden spoon in her hand. She was watching the soup bubble in the pot. Whatever happened that night does not fit easily into any explanation science has agreed upon. It only fits into the long, quiet tradition of stories that families pass down without telling outsiders, in case they sound foolish. Elena waited almost a year before telling anyone in her family. Her sister was the first to hear the full story over coffee in a small cafe near the mountains. The sister listened carefully and then quietly admitted she had her own story about Carmen. A smell of rosemary had filled her car the night their grandmother died, with no candles, no perfumes, and no open windows. Elena's mother, who had spent decades not believing in anything beyond what could be touched, listened with red eyes. She did not argue. She just held Elena's hand and asked her to repeat the exact words Carmen had said on the line. Elena's young niece, who had never met her great-grandmother, drew a picture of an old woman holding a phone receiver. The drawing was uncannily close to old family photos the child had never seen. A family that had buried its grief slowly learned that the woman they lost may never have gone very far at all. Researchers who study these kinds of accounts have noticed a clear pattern. People who experience a warning contact often go through 3 stages. The first stage is shock, when nothing feels real for several days. The second stage is doubt, when the brain tries to find any other explanation. The third stage is acceptance, when the person stops fighting the memory and learns to live with it. She visits her mother more often. She picks up the phone when it rings, even when she does not recognize the number. She lights a candle every Sunday in memory of Carmen. She had the ceiling repaired and moved the rotary phone to a shelf in her bedroom. The phone has never rung again. But on the anniversary of Carmen's death each year, she sets a single candle beside it and waits, just in case her grandmother has one more message left to share. The skeptics in her town call it a dream. The believers call it a miracle. For Elena, it was the night her grandmother showed up from beyond to walk her out of harm's way. And on the coldest nights, Elena swears she can still hear the faint click of a receiver lifting somewhere in the house, even though she's the only one home. Subscribe to hear more stories the world refuses to explain, and share this with someone who knows their family has a story they have never told.